Welcome, dear viewers. It is your favorite self-aware slime-based life form, Dr. Tiberius Slime here. I am thinking from now on I will say, it is time to slime. You know, when I start the video, because a lot of VTubers have a catchy thematic sign-on, and I think that will be part of my branding going forward. I recently watched the film The House That Dripped Blood. It is a horror film produced by Amicus Productions, releasing in the year 1971. I initially thought it was a Hammer horror movie, but apparently this is a common misconception. The two companies share many actors and themes, but this is Amicus, not Hammer. Now, despite having very little understanding or concern for the nuances of human interaction and relationships, and also, I must confess, an inability to feel emotions like fear or love particularly strongly, I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. So what follows is a review of The House That Dripped Blood. And this is Horror Time with Dr. Slime. Yeah, okay, let's go with that. We may be overusing the time motif too much, but until I come up with something better, we're going to go with Horror Time with Dr. Slime. The House That Dripped Blood, which from now on, for the sake of brevity, I will refer to as Drip House, is an anthology horror. For those of you who lack the benefits of a classical education, this means that it is multiple stories in one. These stories range from good to excellent, and even though there are scenes which somewhat stretch credulity to the point of breaking due to budget limitations, the entire piece is deeply charming, and I recommend you watch it as soon as possible. The picture begins with a framing device, in this case a complete asshole of a police detective is sent to some little English shithole who cares village in order to investigate the disappearance of an actor. It seems, along with his being a short-tempered and condescending prick to the dull-witted local police force.
Oh, good afternoon, sir. It's quite an honour to have you come all this way down from Scotland Yard.
You think so? I've got more important things on my plate than chasing temperamental film stars.
Would you like a cup of tea, sir?
I haven't come here for tea either.
The detective must also solve the actor's disappearance. It becomes apparent that the actor took up residence in a house, which I will warn you does not actually drip blood at any point in the film. If you are looking for a film about a house which literally drips blood, this is not the motion picture for you. It did actually cause me some slight consternation at first, but I have now learned that this is an example of figurative or metaphorical language. This needlessly dismissive inspector is told a series of tall tales about this terrifying house and why one should not, in fact, fuck with it by various people. He continues to respond to their well-intentioned, if clumsy, warnings with a dismissive arrogance characteristic of metropolitan elites when confronted with the cider-addled nonsense talk of provincial bumpkins.
It's that house. There's something about it.
What?
I don't know, sir.
I see.
This one I'm calling Stalked by Gallagher. I'm almost 100% certain this is not the same name the director would choose or did choose. This vignette opens with a writer moving to the countryside with his wife. He has writer's block, which is a made-up thing.
I haven't been able to write a line in weeks, you know that.
Writers tend to get precious because their job is easy, and they make up things like writer's block to excuse the laziness inherent in their nature. This man is a lot. He's a horror writer, which is the most lowbrow kind of writer. If Stephen King managed to be a better horror author while ingesting ski slope-sized piles of cocaine than he was while sober, it doesn't speak to the craftsmanship of the genre particularly strongly. I believe he was also an alcoholic. But in his defense, sometimes in order to write great works of fiction that end with child orgies, one must be prepared to do a sizable amount of cocaine. I think it was Ernest Hemingway who said that. The writer moves into the eponymous house that metaphorically will drip blood with his wife, who at this point seems supportive but is getting slightly tired of his shit. In fairness to her, it must be a drag to live with some maudlin, whining artist, but she puts a brave face on it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he gets really into this idea of being strangled by Liam Gallagher, so much so he won't stop talking about it. Oh honey, my book is about being strangled by Liam Gallagher. Oh babe, imagine how messed up it would be to get strangled by Liam Gallagher. Oh sweetheart, wouldn't it be like funny and weird if you dressed as Liam Gallagher and choked me, haha, like as a joke, haha. You know, that sort of thing. Subsequently, he gets so obsessed with the Liam Gallagher strangling fetish that he actually starts to manifest sightings of Liam Gallagher all over the place. And this version of the famous lead singer, he's up for it. But the writer gets scared. Can he really allow himself to be true to this version of him? He runs from Liam Gallagher. His wife, losing her patience at this point,
how much longer do you think we can go on like this?
Gets him perhaps the least sympathetic therapist in human history.
You do think that you can help me? I'll try.
This gentleman is seemingly mad at the writer for breathing. He suggests that it's some kind of psychobabble nut job crap going on with his brain. You should probably just cut this out, he says, essentially. Liam Gallagher does not want to strangle you, it's absurd. Oasis are on tour right now. How will he find the time to strangle you? Know, these kind of logical arguments which do not appeal to the deranged mind. And subsequently the writer is unperturbed by this. He suggests his wife get in on the action, and this tragically gives her the ick.
Don't touch me! Get away from me!
So, back to the shrink with him. Anyway, our author is at the end of his wits. He's starting to think maybe the shrink has a point, until, bam, Liam Gallagher shows up and actually strangles the shrink and the writer, who dies, assumedly an incredibly happy man. The twist at the end is that the wife actually hired an actor to play Liam Gallagher, perhaps because she loved her husband so much she wanted him to die happy, but more likely because she was done with his bullshit. But in another twist, like a double twist, it turns out the actor she hired went true method, like Jared Leto when he played the Joker, or on a more somber note, like Heath Ledger when he played the Joker, and he strangles her. This was the first Amicus Hammer-style horror I have ever seen, and I I suppose, loved it in the sense that I am capable of feeling such an emotion, which is very faintly. It was gothic absurdity. Some moments I found to be effectively genuinely creepy, when the Liam Gallagher guy is acting like the monkey from the old Weeble and Bob videos.
I am the monkey. I can go anywhere.
He's over there. He's sitting in the chair.
Including here, and here, and here.
And just jumping around the living room, he does a very great creepy face. It looks really disturbing. And I think that's also what makes these movies so fascinating, is that they're janky, kind of campy nonsense, but they have really standout, superb actors in lead roles. And when I was looking these guys up, it turns out a lot of them were also war heroes. So, for example, Denham Elliott, he plays the writer. He fought in World War II. He got shot down by the Germans. He went to acting school, got kicked out, eventually worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And this was a time when actors had more exciting lives than the characters they were actually portraying. It lends a gravitas to their performance that comes from having perhaps stabbed a terrified German teenager wearing a Stahlhelm to death in a bombed out factory, or listening to your friends scream as they are incinerated by flak in the sky above Dusseldorf. In Plastic Love, Peter Cushing plays a confirmed bachelor who moves into the drip house next. This man is perfectly happy to spend all of his time alone. While he has never married, he is perfectly fine with that.
I'm used to being alone. As a matter of fact, I'm looking forward to living here and doing some of the things I had little time to do when I was working.
He spends his time thinking about theatrical productions he was involved in, curating his collection of silk cravats, and contemplating purchases of tea sets and other assorted camp frippery. He only becomes visibly distressed upon noticing that a picture of a pretty lady got mixed in with his collection of vintage playbills. He decides to go into town as if running from a thought that has been pursuing him for decades, and even this quiet country house has offered him no true respite. He finds his way to a horror-themed waxwork museum. This is a charming set, and you can practically smell the old cigarette smoke in the carpet and curtains. It's excellently creepy. The uncanniness of being surrounded by terrifying, barely human-looking monsters is, I have been reliably informed, a core memory in the psyche of many millennial and older British human beings. Calling the British human beings may perhaps be an overstatement.
That's enough! That's enough!
I am personally fascinated by the idea of waxwork museums, the macabre spectacle of recognizable actors and historical figures rendered in clay, beeswax and plaster, and for the body, fiberglass. There they stand for decades, unchanging, their slightly unsettling beauty captured at its zenith, even as the real person they are based on screws up their face with buccal fat suction or filler injections out of sheer terror at the prospect of aging. I was going to try and create a clever literary allusion here by saying this is like the opposite of the portrait of Dorian Gray, and then I realised that is just how regular portraits work. Clearly something of this captures the attention of Peter Cushing's debonair protagonist, and he becomes transfixed by a specific model. He cannot take his eyes off this strong-jawed, creepy-looking model of Salome. How do we know it's Salome? because this deeply unsettling little man, a creature almost Gollum-esque in his creepitude, exposits this to Cushing. So begins a tale which is less a love triangle than a confusing fetish square, one that predicted the modern phenomenon of real dolls with startling accuracy. To summarize, Cushing becomes fixated on the doll, perhaps hoping it will allow him to train in the art of finding real women convincingly alluring. The Goblin Man appears to have a cuckolding fantasy centered on his real doll and seems to encourage other men into enjoying her.
She is beautiful, isn't she?
Before being subsequently overwhelmed with a homicidal cuck rage. More on that later. Then there is Peter Cushing's best guy friend, who also becomes obsessed with the real doll, while fending off Cushing's repeated requests that he stay the night.
I'm only sorry you can't stay.
No, I'd better fly back. I'm late now.
Will you stay to dinner? Overnight, if you wish. I've got lots of room. Would you like to stay here tonight?
Like most polyamorous relationships, the whole ordeal ends in tragedy and bloodshed. It turns out the psychotic cuckold in the museum loves only one thing more than watching the corpse of his dead wife entombed in wax being ogled by other men, and that's getting head. Oh, I should have mentioned, the real doll contains the skeleton of his dead wife, which is an example of fiction beating reality to the punch by a couple of decades. Don't search up animal bone waifu if you were planning on feeling goodwill towards your fellow man for the rest of your days. That said, it doesn't bother me because I have very little goodwill towards mankind as it is. All in all, Plastic Love was a wonderfully enjoyable piece of macabre theatre. Some of the close-ups of the Salome model are legitimately quite disconcerting, as is the waxwork museum itself. There's something quite oppressive about these third-rate caravan holiday-type amusements, which makes for an almost primally disconcerting viewing experience. The image of the skeleton jaw protruding from the bottom of the waxwork's face is legitimately chilling. They knew what they had there too, and it is an inspired choice for the poster image. I'm obviously being extremely fatuous with regard to the storyline in this one, I couldn't resist. But there is a sensitivity and vulnerability that Cushing brings to this role, which elevates it way beyond the typical expectations one might have for the genre. When I was doing my research for this video, discovered that his wife either passed away just before filming or was exceptionally ill, terminally so at the time, and it comes across in the role in a way that is hard to express in words, but there is a delicacy to his performance and a realness to it.
It always worries me for those left behind. They're the people who really suffer. It's terrifying, the most terrifying thing to lose a partner of that kind. Far worse, I think, than really losing one of your own blood. I mean, that's bad enough. But when you've seen your mother, first my father, and then my mother, and then my brother, and then my sister-in-law, and then my wife, you begin to wonder when your turn's coming, have they forgotten you? Up there, or down there, or just alongside. It's not very far, it's just a step away, really, where we go.
Apparently that is true, he put a lot of his grief into his acting. It's a really beautiful story, perhaps not appropriate for this. And again, I don't care, I'm made of slime, I think it's all stupid. But Cushing himself is another example of a man with a fascinating life story. He was racked with illnesses throughout his childhood and even in later life. surviving bouts of pneumonia in a time when they were in the era of have a cup of tea and a stiff drink to cure leukemia kind of medical science. Even his being alive is an achievement. He struggled to break into acting his entire life and only really got his big break in his 40s after a number of false starts, again supported by his wife, a talented artist. He actually designed silk scarves as gifts for his co-workers on a project at one point, meaning that affectation in the character was something he probably brought to the role. Additionally, as a fellow reanimator and disrespecter of the dead, I have to applaud the Disney Corporation for cynically CGIing him into one of their putrid Star Wars projects. I would say I couldn't have done it better myself, but I could. I would have actually brought his consciousness back and got him to act in that scene. But as it stands, a wonderful parading of essentially a dead man's corpse for monetary gain. So big shout out to Disney on that one. Next to enter the drip house is Christopher Lee. He's having girl problems, specifically this girl, his adorable daughter, and Christopher needs to give this child an education, but he doesn't want her interacting with other children. This is before the age of social media, when you could actually pretty reliably isolate your children from their peers without locking them in a basement and feeding them a low-protein diet to make them especially weak. It's also the countryside in the 1970s, so there is virtually no degenerate modern culture like flared jeans or rock music to turn her into a glassy-eyed drug addict, or worse, get her into student politics. Nowadays, it's of course virtually impossible to protect a child from the influence of malicious freaks and sociopathic bullies, thanks to the internet, showing that the 70s were quite a backwards and stuffy and boring time. Anyway, Mr. Lee decides to hire, I guess, a nanny or an au pair or a governess or a babysitter. Humans have so many arduous terms for the people who ensure their spawn do not choke on their own vomit or suffocate themselves by sleeping on their face. He hires a woman to educate his child for him so he can spend more productive time looking at charts and brooding angrily in his study, like good fathers used to do before the 2000s. Regardless, Lee hates his daughter, he finds her tiresome and wishes to keep her out of the sight of society, which is understandable. Human children are weak, stupid creatures. The child in the story is at least 8 times older than myself, yet would struggle to comprehend the fundamentals of string theory or develop even a simple machine learning algorithm. I have myself produced a number of offspring via mitosis, several of whom have become quite influential in the tech space, although a couple have been eaten by birds. Of course, as an emotionally driven flesh sack, the governess is unable to accept these perfectly reasonable feelings of shame and disgust from Christopher Lee, and she decides to begin meddling. The girl starts to learn things quickly, disturbingly quickly for a human, which is embarrassingly, achingly slow for example, slime being, but that isn't important. Then, in a fashion typical of the foolish sentimentality humans are often prey to, the governess wants to buy the girl toys. Apparently the girl is not allowed toys. Now, in a well-established hierarchy, there is no discussion. For example, one of my VTubers, Chase Chinoda, asked me if I could let his family know that he is still quote-unquote alive, and I told him in no uncertain terms that when we hit 1,000 subscribers, he can maybe message them. End of discussion. Without rules, we are no better than animals, or in my case, without rules, I am no better than a human, which is just a type of animal. But Lee's character is too soft. He relents and allowed his spoiled humanling access to a small selection of recreational materials. I have been reliably informed that horror movie victims must commit some kind of transgression, no matter how slight, so that there is a sense of poetic justice to their ultimate destruction. The old woman in Gremlins is a bitch who is mean to dogs. In Drag Me to Hell, the protagonist is rude to a conniving, sneaky old gypsy woman. And in Friday the 13th, they are horny. Georgie in It was stupid. Lee's weakness in dealing with his employers is his great transgression, for which the film will rightly punish him. His belligerent, wrong-headed employee goes so far as to purchase a doll for the girl. It is a betrayal that Lee takes pretty well. In fact, too well, all things considered. But it is already too late. The child has been corrupted by the base frivolity of the toy she was given. And, like many children have since the 1980s, she gets into witchcraft. Devil worship type stuff, real sick shit. From here things spiral. And while the fact that the child's mother, also allegedly a witch, was murdered by the father may play somewhat into the events that follow, my personal reading of the movie is that the toys were the inciting incident. The child begins to act up, smiling, reading books about feminism, asking questions that are difficult to answer, all things that a good child does not do. At one point she steals candles. This is a big deal in the movie, and I assume this is because candles are a luxury item in the notoriously miserable and poverty-stricken British Isles. The father does not know what to do. The stress and disappointment begin to manifest as severe anxiety and panic attacks. However, as this is set in the 1970s, such psychological phenomena were often dismissed as mental enfeeblement or being a pussy. Of course, the intellectual midget he hired as a governess jumps to the conclusion that this is witchcraft and that the child is responsible. She is, of course, a deeply stupid woman, yet a broken clock is right twice a day. Unfortunately, this revelation comes too late to save Christopher Lee from the consequences of his daughter's newfound interest in revisionist feminist historiography, and he is melted. You don't see him get melted, but it's very clearly implied that he does actually get melted. This was not my favourite of the stories in the anthology, but I still enjoyed it. The actress playing the little girl does an excellent job. As a slime, I still find I have trouble telling the difference between human children and just very short people, but regardless of which the actress is, she does an outstanding job. There are moments when her blank, slightly idiotic innocence becomes a deeply unsettling menace, and I'm not sure how she does it, but she does it well. Christopher Lee is, as always, a consummate and brilliant actor. Because I lack the human familial bonds that make their subversion haunting and effective in horror movies, the idea of evil children does not much move me. I would simply strike them or yell at them very loudly. However, Lee's performance, his insistence, his growing disquiet, lends the outlandish premise that a child would be threatening a real sense of credibility. Again, it may have been his real-life experience ripping out the throats of Nazis that aided his performance. This is the last and probably most downright humorous of the vignettes in Drip House. It's funny and quite meta in a way that I do not fully understand due to my lack of familiarity with the genre and human social mores. But again, the performances and obvious love of the genre that resonates throughout meant that the whole piece was well worth my time. Of course, my time may not be especially valuable because it is unclear at this point if I age, but you understand what I am getting at. In this one, Jon Pertwee portrays an actor whose only failings are that he is a bit of a diva, which, considering the revelations of the last 15 years or so about virtually every actor and film producer in Hollywood, makes him a borderline saintly figure. He quite reasonably takes issue with the shitty production values of the crappy blood and boobs schlock film he is working on, which is a rather charming and self-referential jab at films which many of the cast from this movie were also a part of.
Frankenstein, Phantom of the Opera, Dracula. The one with Bela Lugosi, of course, not this new fella.
One wonders what the crew of films like Drip House would think of revolutionary technology like Disney's Volume, which has achieved the lofty aim of making any environment you can imagine look like it was ripped from a PlayStation 3 game. Good luck putting a fist through that, Pertwee, they might say, probably to good-natured laughter as the seasoned actor mimes a punching action while giving a little smile which seems to say, "Oh, you rascals." It turns out the costume department are also as bad at their jobs as the idiot director, and Pertwee is forced to look elsewhere to supply his own, more authentic wardrobe. One night he's walking back from a brothel or opium den or whatever actors did recreationally in the 1970s when he happens upon a curio shop. The kind of place that would nowadays sell crystals, tarot cards, and tasteful nudes of slightly overweight goth women rendered in an Art Nouveau style. In the 70s, the gentrification of weird, supernatural adjacent bullshit had not yet taken place, so instead of those things, the shop contains items that were likely collected from the estate sale of creepy old people found partially eaten by their cats months after their death. Instead of the typical, incredibly attractive but unapproachable woman or poorly groomed and overly enthusiastic fat man one tends to find in the modern version of businesses with the aesthetic discussed, the owner is the more traditional, semi-desiccated mortician type. He sells Pertwee a cape that looks pretty much identical to the shitty one provided by the nepo baby morons in the wardrobe department of his current employer. But it's better, we just have to take that on faith, or perhaps the salesman just saw Pertwee coming and managed to hoodwink him. This leads to Pertwee's character going method. Something which has an odd habit of making actors get a little aggressive and unpleasant with their co-stars in a way that is probably exceptionally tiresome to deal with. This is no exception. Pertwee does a Martin Cove and bites his attractive co-star. At first she is really quite pissed off about it, but later seems to be kind of into it. Women, am I right? No, that is a genuine question. I really don't know much about women and whether the statement I just made is correct or not. Pertwee comes to realize the cloak is turning him into a vampire in an escalating series of weird events. I particularly love the visual of him floating away, looks great. You can tell Taika Waititi, despite whatever faults you think he may have, really loves vampire movies because there is a bit in What We Do in the Shadows which was an obvious tribute to effects like this. I don't think anybody has actually figured out how to make flying/hovering look believable in movies yet. It's always just gonna look weird. My personal pick for most believable is Christopher Walken in the Fatboy Slim music video. So Pertwee, despite being into this chick, really is worried about getting Me Too'd. He starts warning her to get out of there before he starts acting wrong. However, this girl is the kind who writes love letters to serial killers, and the kind of girl who winds down by listening to podcasts about horrific multiple murders, so she's actually into it. Of course, it wouldn't be Drip House if there wasn't a twist where it turned out the woman was actually secretly a conniving evil bitch, so yeah, she actually was a vampire the whole time. I was going to make a joke like, well, I let vampire Ingrid Pitt bite me, but ultimately decided against it for 3 reasons. Reason number 1, I am made of slime, so the scenario is illogical to the point of redundancy. Point number 2, were I a human, I would still not allow her to bite me because being drained of blood by a vampire seems a deeply unpleasant experience regardless of how attractive the vampire actually is. And number 3, saying I'd let vampire Ingrid Pitt bite me seems one step away from the kind of like, oh, step on me muscle mommy humour that I find utterly repellent. So obviously Pertwee and Pitt are the shining stars of this vignette, and once again this review in the creating has become rather more about the actors than I realised, because I enjoyed them in the film so much, and then learning about them, they're such fascinating people. You know, Pertwee was in the middle of his run as the Doctor in the notoriously campy and crap British national curio Doctor Who, which by all accounts has finally completed its transformation from guilty pleasure to unwatchable trash. I wouldn't know, I have never watched it, it looks stupid. Pitt was also in a number of episodes playing bit parts which I'm sure were also beneath her. Pertwee was again one of the real-life James Bond types who served in World War II doing secret cloak and dagger stuff. I think perhaps there is a self-assurance that comes with having actually taken human life in combat that gives you the ability to play the fool without a shred of self-doubt or anxiety. See Christopher Lee in The Wicker Man running around in a dress and wig at the end.
What's the matter with you, McGregor? Do you call that dancing? Cut some capers, man!
And I think, you know, you can say something similar of Ingrid Pitt. She really dives into the hissing she-devilry of playing a stage vampire in a way that you'd have to be a real humorless prick not to enjoy. Maybe it was escaping a concentration camp with her mother before her 10th birthday that, you know, gave her a perspective on life that allowed her to sort of throw herself into the silliest of scenes with a kind of abandon that elevates the entire production. I imagine you don't need to force the idea, you need to be taken seriously if you are acutely aware that you are about as serious of a person as it is possible to be. You know, it's a far cry from modern actors like The Rock and Jason Statham, who have clauses in their contract saying they can't lose a fight on screen. But then if I was them, I would too, because I think they're probably a pair of pussies and I would easily fuck either of them up in a fight. Pitt was also a fascinating woman. It seems she spent time after the war searching through Eastern Europe for her father, who was most likely a victim of the Holocaust. She had an interest in World War II fighter planes, I think even learned to fly them, and she lived with a Native American tribe for a few years with her daughter. It seems strange to me that when looking for inspiration in writing fictional characters, modern writers don't turn to more of these real-life examples for inspiration. But what do I know, I'm made of slime.
To ride into the bull ring in...
Yes, I did rejonear, as I call it, which is a Portuguese invented style of bullfighting, which you do on horseback. But I never did kill a bull. I also drove rallies in a car, and I gave that up. I just loved speed more than anything else. I loved it. I thought it was tremendous. And I gave that up when I had a tremendous fall, 80 feet with a car. Down it went, right?
So there you have it. That's the previous occupants of Drip House, all tied up, and it's time for our delightfully short-tempered detective who has had just about enough of these wet-brained yokels spinning their tiresome fantabulisms to go and visit the house. He wants to see it drip, and he wants to see it now. So A.J. Stoker, and yes, that is an intentional reference, takes him to Drip House under protest. And he goes charging in with the kind of reckless desire to uphold justice that the modern British police generally reserve for people on Twitter causing trouble. He ends up going all Van Helsing on Pertwee, but runs out of juice by the time Ingrid Pitt turns up, and she, I'm assuming, tears his head off. If she did, it is left ambiguous. She would have finally made the house that dripped blood. So the movie ends with A.J. Stoker himself standing before the Drip House and telling us the secret of the house, the kind of unifying thread that runs through all the vignettes and the framing device too. And despite spoiling literally everything else about this movie, I will leave this final surprise for you to discover yourselves, dear viewers. I will say it is a bit of a stretch, but I'm not going to hate on it because, as I said, I as close to the emotion love as it's possible for me to feel this movie. I wanted to talk about this movie because, unlike most of existence, I enjoyed it, and I think you would too. If you've watched this video up to this point, it suggests you're at least vaguely interested in the subject matter. Almost everyone involved in the production of this motion picture is dead now, apart from maybe the little girl or dwarf from the Voodoo Child vignette. So I'm not saying you need to support the artist, just watch it because you deserve to watch something that was made by passionate, skilled people. And that's what I've come away from this process with a far greater awareness and respect for, and it's the people who made up films like this and this film. And I've only really talked about the on-screen talent. I hope to maybe delve into some of the folks behind the camera if I make any future reviews. But they're all such fascinating people, and something about them is, in a way, much more alive than a lot of the stars of today. You know, it's so easy to look at their old style, their received pronunciation, and the jankiness of the effects they had available to them, and diminish them as stale. But these were people who lived, and they really lived. Theirs are incredible stories, tragic, inspiring and beautiful, and the paths they took led them to make this wonderful, macabre, strange little film. I really wonder what their conversations on set were like and the stories they told, and actually that made me kind of think it's a shame that we now live in a time where we can capture every moment of production in 4K resolution, and we can probe the actors and directors for their deepest insights while, I guess, eating spicy chicken wings. I don't know, I don't watch that show, I don't have a brain injury, but unfortunately, you know, there is nothing particularly novel to see in these behind the scenes looks. There is nothing of interest these people have to say. That's probably unfair, but again, I am Slime,